Sixth episode begins with Julia waking in her soaked bed. Her water has broken. Julia ventures outside to chat with Brian. He senses that the baby is on the way. He immediately orders the others to send for the howdy, a midwife. Julia explains that her child's father is Henry, not Lord Lovat. She only laid with Lovat to curb his unwanted advances and to protect herself and her baby. She reassures him that he's not getting a little brother. Brian seems to believe her this time. He warns her about what's to come. Confinement won't be easy. However, this ain't Julia's first rodeo. Meanwhile, Henry attempts to sneak away to look for midwives in the area. Arch catches him. He reveals that he and the Laird are tired of Henry's incessant searching for some mystery woman. Henry finally shares that he's on the hunt for his wife. She's pregnant and due to give birth very soon. Arch's face changes. He discloses that he and his wife Deina lost a child. Deina was lucky to survive. Arch vows to chat with Isaac Grant about arranging interviews with midwives to determine if anyone has met Julia. Elsewhere, Deina stokes Lovat's fire and empties the chamber pot, preparing his quarters for the day. She recalls the first time he raped her years ago. Lovat threatened to sack her if she didn't comply. He pulled her on top of him and forced himself into her. In the present, Lovat mutters, "Julia," to himself before turning to see it's Deina. Deina informs him that Julia is about to give birth. Initially, he doesn't believe her. When it dawns on him that this is actually happening, Lovat reveals his plans to take Julia to the Kirk. He doesn't want his son, a future Scottish king, to be born out of wedlock. The boy must be legitimized. Deina insists that Julia is too far along to make the trek to the Kirk. Julia enters the main hall, where her confinement will take place. She sits on a makeshift bed. On the upper level, Brian and Deina have a chat. Brian hopes everyone will treat Julia kindly. She's a Sassenach, after all, with different customs than them. Deina asks Brian if he and Julia are a thing. Brian's had a glint in his eye of late. Brian insists they're nothing more than friends. Brian asks his mother if she ever wanted to marry Lovat. Deina mentions how Lovat treated her mistress, Lady Amelia, the noblewoman he stands accused of kidnapping and raping. Brian asks Deina if she loved Lovat at one point. Deina evades answering that one. Brian wants to be worthy of the Fraser name. He wants to stand tall, like a giant among men. His mom reassures him that he is worthy of carrying the family moniker. She wonders what's gotten into him. He's never cared about titles or coin before. Regardless, she advises him to find a lass who's truly deserving of him. Later, Henry questions a series of midwives. None of them help deliver an Englishwoman's baby. Arch observes the interactions from afar. Henry looks slightly discouraged, but soldiers on. At the same time, the howdy and the gossipers arrive at Castle Leathers. One of them places a cake on the table. Then, the women surround Julia. They claim they're there to help Julia through the confinement and birth of her bairn. Of course, mentions of the prophecy take center stage. Sure, Julia and the Laird aren't married. However, who wouldn't want to usher the future King of Scotland into the world? Deina tells the group that a bastard is a bastard. She accuses Julia of seducing Lovat for her own gains and of doing the same with her son. She's a temptress. The howdy and the gossipers instantly turn on Julia. Their tune shifts from one of ardent support to immense judgment. According to them, Julia must repent of her sins, regardless of whether she's carrying a king. The women hurl vitriol and scream at her. Deina asks Julia about the father of her child. Who is he? Julia doubles down, asserting that Lord Lovat is her baby's dad. Elsewhere, Brian and Lovat drink to the next Fraser. Brian gets vulnerable with his father. He wonders what he has to do to be deserving of the Fraser name in his dad's eyes. How does he please Lovat? Brian insists he does plenty around the household. Lovat rattles off qualities that make a man. Per his assessment, Brian doesn't fit the bill. However, he is a handsome lad. At the same time, the women kick Julia out of her bed. They encircle her like vultures, ready to pick a carcass clean. Once more, they order her to repent. Julia pleads with Deina, appealing to her sensibilities. Julia reminds the group that she's carrying the Laird's child. She could bring him in to corroborate her statements. Julia reassures Deina that she's not trying to steal anything from the latter. She says that Brian is shaped by the love Deina pours into him. She apologizes for Lovat ruining Davina's life. We get another flashback to when Deina was pregnant with Brian. Lovat forced himself into her while she was working. In the present, Henry questions a midwife who knows Julia Beauchamp. Nice lassie, she was, the woman states. The woman claims that a crofter and his wife took Julia in after they discovered her wandering the moors some miles west of here. Apparently, Julia and the baby died during childbirth. Henry looks utterly devastated. He's incredulous at first. Next, Henry demands to know where Julia and his child are. Arch urges Henry to drink away the pain before getting back to work. Outside, Arch pays the midwife. As it turns out, he and the laird orchestrated all this. The woman lied about Julia and the baby's deaths to put an end to Henry's search. Later, the women surround Julia again, pulling her to the ground. They attempt to cleanse her of a demonic spirit. Julia calls out for Lovat. Deina asks again if Lovat truly is the father. She urges Julia to swear it on her baby's life. Julia fires back that she will never do that. She will do anything to protect her child. Davina's face softens. She understands now. In another flashback, we see Deina in her own confinement. The Howdy and gossipers accused her of seducing Lovat. They also tried to harm Davina's baby. Realizing she endured the same experience as Julia, Deina orders the Howdy and gossipers to leave. Outside, Lovat and Brian meet the Reverend, who will wed the Laird and Julia right in castle leathers. Lovat watches as the Howdy and gossipers depart. He urges them to spread the good news that Lovat and Julia tied the knot before welcoming their child. Lovat makes a beeline for the main hall upon learning that Deina has locked herself in there with Julia. Lovat bangs on the door, demanding that Deina open it. Deina orders him to leave. Even the Reverend remarks that Julia is in no shape to recite any vows. After Deina stands up to Lovat, the latter slaps her across the face. Brian lunges at his father, screaming at him to stay away from his mother. Brian also stands up to Lovat and gives him the boot, reminding him that men aren't allowed in the confinement space. Lovat orders Balak to grab the strap. He declares that Brian will pay for what he surely deems as insolence. Once the men leave, Deina coaches Julia through the childbirth process. We flash back to Claire's birth in 1918. Henry arrives just in time as a midwife helps Julia give birth in their flat. Henry puts on music to alleviate Julia's pain. She finally gives birth to Claire. Julia and Henry hold their newborn daughter together, marveling at her. In the present or past, Julia pushes out a baby boy. Deina smacks his back to get him to cry. When he does, she places him in Julia's arms. Julia grins from ear to ear. We return to Deina's confinement after birthing Brian. She holds him in her arms and smiles. Meanwhile, Henry runs into the woods, far away from the Grant house. He hyperventilates, but then he recalls Julia's advice. Henry holds his head high and continues running, tears streaking his cheeks. The scene transitions to the end of World War I. Henry runs through the streets of London, enthusiastically proclaiming that the war is over. He barrels into his flat with Julia. Here we see a glitch of sorts. At one point, Henry's getup changes from 20th century clothing to 18th century garb. He's really with Seema in the brothel, pretending she's Julia. Next, he embraces her, claiming he never would have made it through without her. Initially, Seema is bewildered, but she plays along. Then we see a splicing of two scenes, Henry and Julia having sex in 1919, and Henry and Seema having sex in 1714. Afterward, Henry tells Seema, or Julia, that all he needs is her and Claire. Elsewhere, Balak whips Brian as Lovat watches. After this, he reunites with Julia, who's relishing the time with her newborn. Brian says that Julia's child might not be his brother, but he vows to be a friend to him. Julia wishes Henry were here. Brian reassures Julia and her baby that they will find Henry one day. Julia remarks that she gets her strength from her children. Brian admits he doesn't have a gift for the bairn. Julia asks Brian about his birthday. Brian doesn't know when he was born. Deina probably does. Julia shares that, where she's from, it's customary to light a candle on a cake and blow it out on your birthday. You must make a wish first, though. Julia grabs the cake that the Howdy and gossipers brought. She lights the candle and presents it to Brian, insisting he must do the honors. Brian makes a wish and blows it out.